everyone. Welcome to This Week in Business. We've got a really hot topic for you today, and I'm going to hit straight over to Anthony so we can kick off this awesome discussion.
Well, it's a new year, and a lot of us are starting to get back into looking at our businesses and how they're working for us. And a common theme we've come across several people over the past week has been the question of pricing. When we look at pricing, there are broadly three camps that people can fit into. And depending on how well you understand your business and the value you're creating for your customer, it's worth understanding there are these three different approaches at a high level. The first and probably laziest approach, which we sometimes see, is looking at what your competitors charge and going, well, if my competitor's charging X, I need to match that and be, X minus what percentage. Or plus. And that's useful and perhaps lazy a little bit. And I can see where it'd have value if you're selling a commodity. If I'm harvesting wheat, I can't really charge much more for my wheat than my next door neighbours who's also harvesting wheat if we're both selling exactly the same product. That has relevance in that space, but in a services space, in a small business space, and when you're creating a product that has differentiation, all of a sudden that's no longer relevant. Another thing which we often see is people do a cost plus pricing, and they go through, and a lot of the time you look at just those costs in terms of you buying the goods. I'm a shop, for example, selling widgets. A lot of small businesses will look at the widgets that come in the door and say, well, they've cost me $10. I want to sell it for, a 50% profit, which is the first mistake, is they'll look at a markup, which means they put $15 on it rather than a 50% margin, which would be $20, and then push it out the door without considering all of their costs. Kingsley, I'm sure you'd come across this a fair bit with people's calculations in terms of looking at what they're selling things on a cost plus basis.
Yeah, the cost plus people, I guess generally what I would try, if I confronted this, I generally will get people almost to work right back to the start and say, well, how much actual money do you want to make in a year? You're doing 60 hours a week, you've got your house on the line, you want to make $150,000 for all that or whatever it is. And then, how many hours depending on what it is, whether it's goods or services or whatever, working back to what will get them that number. Sometimes you're confronted with, the price I've got to sell them at is astronomical, and then you have got the issue with the competitor. And in that case, then something's got to change, and it might well be on the cost side of your cost structure that you've got to find a way to do it cheaper and better, and see where they go from there. The other issue you get with a lot of the cost plus sort of stuff, I guess, is people will be very focused on the very direct costs, whether it's labour or the goods in or whatever, and not looking at the fixed cost part, which is the hardest part of the pricing, because you got $100 of fixed costs and you sell 100 widgets. Well, it's $1 each, but if you sell 50, it's now gone to $2, and so you've got to sort of, to some degree, get your crystal ball out and say, how many do I think I'm going to sell, and then price it on that basis. And lots of people just completely forget about that piece altogether. And the other really hard part, depending on what you're doing in costing it, and the really big shows spend enormous effort on, is they talk about sort of like activity-based sort of costing, where you might be selling widget A and widget B, but widget B needs cold storage and all these other things, and the freight or whatever else. So it's causing much more of your cost than what the other one is. So you can't just say, I'm just going to split me fixed costs 50-50 because I've got two products. It might be that product B is causing the vast majority of that fixed cost. So you've got to use a bit of sophistication and unfortunately judgment, which is very, very hard for accountants usually to come to grips with than what it is for the client, because it's not just a nice neat 1 + 1 = 2 sort of scenario. So that's sort of the main things I try to get across to people, to be very cognizant on when they're trying to come up with numbers.
Thanks, Kingsley. The third point, or the third pricing model I'd really like people to start thinking about is a value-driven pricing. And this is even harder to really get your hand around, but it's looking at the value you're creating for the customer. Now, and that really comes down to understanding how big a problem you're solving for them. You know, if you've got a really unique offering and you're the only person who can do a certain thing and solve a particular problem, it's going to be really difficult for you to go out and look at your competitors' pricing because you probably don't have any direct competitors in that space. But taking the effort to really understand from your customers how big a problem you've solved and the value that they place on that will give you an understanding as to how much they're willing to part with you to solve that problem. And this is, you know, quite a tricky marketing question to get your head around. But once you've done that and you understand the real value you're creating for that customer, then you can all of a sudden look at your pricing model and say, right, the solution that I'm offering is worth X to the customer. So long as I'm charging, you know, X or less, I should be able to win business. You want to then go back and have a look at your cost plus model and make sure that you are actually delivering, you know, a profitable outcome at whatever that X is. And it's also useful to cross-reference it against not only your direct competitors, if you have them, but also your indirect competitors. You know, it might be another way of solving the problem. Up until recently, for example, you know, you wouldn't have compared a kitchen renovation with an international trip. But in the current market, we're seeing a lot of that money that would have gone to the international trip going to the kitchen renovation. And people are looking at it going, well, you know, it's probably worth the European trip that I'm not taking this year to get my kitchen done. And so looking at that value-based creation that you're offering them, people have a degree of satisfaction they're getting out of it. That's why they reach into their pocket. That's it for the pricing models. I think there's some general tips around pricing that I think we would like to bring to people's awareness. My favourite one and the biggest misunderstanding I've come across is the difference between markup and margin. Do you want to perhaps talk to that one a little, Kingsley?
Yeah, I guess it's just in the mathematics of sort of you're buying something in for $10 and you mark it up to $20, so you've had 100% markup. Then you've doubled it, but your profit margin, your gross margin, of course, is $20 that you sold it for less the $10 you bought it for. That's 50%, and people get very jumbled up, and the two terms sound very similar, and the mathematics of it sort of things. I have had sort of conversations with someone who's jumbled the two definitions, and it's very hard to get them to see what you're talking about. Sort of, I'm trying to think, was the Tower of Babel almost sort of a situation?
Why I encourage people to look at margin as a metric rather than markup is because discount is directly proportional to margin. If you offer a 10% discount, that comes straight out of the margin that you've got there. You know, so if you had 10% margin and you've offered 10% discount, you've got precisely zero left at the end of the equation. So it becomes a good way of looking at these things a little bit different. Markups easy, but perhaps a little bit lazy sometimes. Discounts brings us on to another point, and I think you've got some comments to talk about with regards to discounting and value. Louise.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about discounting. Funnily enough, I just went and had my hair done, and my hairdresser was actually telling me about how she doesn't mind giving her friends and family discounts when she does their hair. But then she was also talking about how pretty much everyone that comes to her, because she's a home-based salon, they're her friends, and so she kind of discounts everyone. And I had the straight conversation with her and said, well, how does that work for your business? Are you making the money that you hoped for in your business? And she said, well, not so much, because I give a lot of discounts. And that really comes back to that confidence in what you're charging. And I guess when you have a product, it's a bit differently. Sometimes you discount things. If you're selling products, you're discounting things to get sales because you want to get some money through the door. But you always do need to think about that margin when you are doing that discounting on products. But when you offer a service, you can offer discounts if you want to, But the discounting that you give when you offer a service is you're actually discounting your value that you're giving people. You're basically saying that you're not worth the money that you charge or that you hope to charge for your business. And it's really important as a business owner to have that posture around what you're doing. I guess as an accountant, you can, Kingsley can probably say, well, I charge, I don't know, for example, $150 an hour, and that's what I charge. And people are going to come or go because people need accountants. For me, for example, as a virtual assistant, I charge the rate that I charge. For certain jobs, I have different rates because of the complexities, and that's just how I operate my business. But I don't discount anyone, because that would mean that I actually discount the work that I do and that I do not believe in what I do. So in a service-based business, when you start discounting, your value is a direct reflection on the value that you put on the work you do. And it's a confidence thing, guys, and you really need to look at yourselves and maybe do a bit of personal development around having that confidence, and go talk to your accountant about your rate, because they're the ones who are going to tell you, if you want to make money, you've got to charge this. And I'm sure we've all had those discussions at some point, but it is really important that you get that decision made on what you're charging and just go with it, because otherwise you're not going to value yourself and actually make money in your business. So that's my little rant about value.
I think it's a really good one. And in short, stand up tall, hold your shoulders back, put your chin out and say, yep, I am worth every cent of what I'm charging there. And really think about that, because we've got some great resources, which I think Louise is going to put in the comments below. We've got an article which I posted recently on how to measure and ascertain your consumer value you're creating. We've got a freelancer versus employee worksheet, which might be a useful one for you. And if there's anything you'd like to ask about pricing, feel free to reach out to the group or us individually and post your questions there. We'd love to hear from you, and perhaps more discussion around topics like this going forward.
Yeah, and if you guys ever need a pep talk about your pricing, the three of us are here to support you and support whatever pricing you've set for your business and help you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. All right, that's it for us today. Kingsley, do you have anything else to talk about with pricing?
No, not particularly. I guess the only little anecdote I'll chuck in, which of course is not necessarily for every business. A lot of people hear these things and seize on them, but I always found very interesting they moved away from it, and that's how Coles / Wesfarmers sort of got into them, is Woolworths had what they called a virtuous circle, where if they identified something in the business where they were able to make a saving, they had a broad rule that said, if that saved $10 million across all the Woolworths, they would use $5 million of it as to discount, and they would keep the other 5% for their margin. And that enabled them to sell a bit more because they were a bit cheaper than Coles, and they were still making a bit more on every one they sold, and in a sense, the perfect outcome. Now, different products, different businesses, different price elasticities and whatever else, but I just thought that was, whether you do 50-50, 70-30, whatever, is obviously a very customisable thing, but just a smart, simple little strategy that served them fabulously well for about 20 years.
And just remember, you can't go to Woolworths or Coles and ask for a discount, so don't feel bad if you say no to people.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you all again next week.